Arriving as part of the invasion force in 43 AD, the 9th marched from southern England into the Midlands before pushing north, passing through this area of Britain.
For nearly 2,000 years, Rome's fiercest legion vanished without a trace. No bodies, no battle, no explanation. But in 2025, a shocking discovery in the Scottish Highlands exposed a truth far more disturbing than anyone imagined. These weren't just soldiers lost to time. They were erased, betrayed, and ritually destroyed. What really happened to the 9th Legion? The answer will rewrite everything we thought we knew about the Roman Empire. And it's way worse than we thought. The drone that changed history. A basic drone scan over a calm part of the Scottish Highlands was the first step. Archaeologists from the University of Edinburgh were looking for Bronze Age bones that had been buried in peat for hundreds of years. But as the drone's radar scanned a wide valley, the screen lit up with a shape that no one expected. Underneath layers of dirt was a huge, rectangular, segmented structure that was clearly Roman. It wasn't simply a wall or a watchtower, it was the shape of a whole military camp. The vastness of the site shocked the team. Most Roman outposts in Britain were modest forts, but this one was much bigger. It had ample room for almost 5,000 men, which is about the same number as a Roman legion. The camp looked weird, with an uneven layout, broken lines, and parts that appeared like they had been dug up quickly. Everything about it made it seem like it wasn't made for everyday use, but for survival. The evidence became clearer as they mapped the site. There were a lot of hobnails, which are the iron studs that hold Roman sandals together, all over the ground. They found pieces of shields, broken spearheads, and pieces of metal, just a few inches below the surface. Some of the gear was charred or broken in half, as if it had been ripped apart during battle. Some were stacked or placed in a strange way, which makes it seem like soldiers threw them away hurriedly, maybe in a panic. The team's biggest surprise was the shape of the camp. Roman camps had rigid plans, immaculate squares, neat rows, and guarded gates. This one appeared more like a puzzle. The defense trenches were not deep enough and were not finished. What should have been nice sleeping areas were merely open holes, some of which were full of burned bones. It seemed less like a base and more like a temporary cage. The timeline was too perfect for overlooking. Historians had long argued about what happened to the 9th Legion when it disappeared from Roman archives about 117 AD. An old myth said they marched north into Scotland and were never seen again. Some people said they were secretly moved to the east, but this place was just on the northern route that some thought the 9th had traveled. No one had ever uncovered real proof until today. Most of the ideas came from bits and pieces of Roman texts and vague stories told by tribes in the north. But this camp altered everything. It was big and violent, and it was right where the 9th may have stopped or made a final stand. For the first time in hundreds of years, there was a hard hint instead of guesswork. The artifacts made the mystery even more interesting. Roman coins during the time of Emperor Trajan, which is the final time the 9th was known to be in power. They also unearthed iron arrowheads, although they weren't Roman. They looked like native Caledonian styles and were made by hand and shot from short-range bows. That signified that the legion had been attacked, and not merely in battle, but even in their own camp. The bones of the animals also surprised us. Some had cuts that weren't produced by hunting instruments, but by military knives. It seemed like the troops had killed their own pack animals, not to eat them, but maybe to save them from getting into the hands of the enemy. This suggests that the legion was under siege and had few options left. It backs up the idea that the 9th wasn't attacked from behind, but rather besieged and worn out. Then the holes came. There were long, narrow pits filled with mixed remains, armor, bones, and shattered gear deep in the middle of the camp. These weren't places to bury people. They looked like graves that had been excavated in a hurry. Forensic tests showed that many of the skeletons had multiple sword marks, usually on the back, that were not from battle but from escape or betrayal. There was also something missing from the layout: any signs of a proper retreat path. When Roman soldiers built emergency forts, they always left a way out. There were none on this site. The only way out once you were inside was to go straight through enemy lines. That could be why no one lived to tell the story. Finding odd markings cut into a rock near the outer trench made things even scarier. These weren't Roman emblems, they were native symbols used in tribal death ceremonies. That suggested that this was more than just a military loss. It could have been a cultural erasure or a ritual cleaning. Not only did the ninth die, but they may have also been sacrificed. This thought is novel. In the past, speculation said that the military would lose, but this site suggests something darker: premeditated, symbolic destruction. The legion may not have merely been foes, but also invaders who needed to be forgotten. Not only did the native tribes slaughter them, but they also buried their bodies. And Rome just let it happen and went on with its business. This long-lost camp, which was found by chance in 2025, converts an old enigma into a scary reality. The Ninth Legion didn't just go away. They died in a harsh and chaotic way in a foreign region, far from Roman roads and rules. And now that the ground has finally given up its secrets, the true mystery isn't how they disappeared, but why no one ever came seeking. The idea that the Ninth Legion wasn't merely defeated in battle, but also wiped out in a tribal ceremonial purging, a cultural cleaning meant to get rid of their heritage as well as their lives. Most YouTube videos and documentaries haven't looked into this storyline very much. They weren't defeated in battle. They were erased from memory. A legion lost, not to war, but silence. The legion that history tried to forget. The Ninth Legion wasn't just any Roman force. It was elite, hardened by war, and feared across the empire. These were the same men who crushed rebellions in Spain, fought under Julius Caesar in Gaul, and helped put down Boudicca's revolt in Britain. They were known for marching faster, hitting harder, and obeying orders without hesitation. Discipline in the Ninth was brutal, but it made them one of the most reliable tools in Rome's military machine. This wasn't a group that would break under pressure, and yet, somehow, they vanished. Their last confirmed post was in Eboracum, modern-day York, around the year 117 AD. At that point, the empire was shifting, with unrest in Britain and new threats rising along the northern frontier. It made sense that the Ninth would be stationed there, a strong, proven legion to hold the line. But then, something strange happened. After that year, there's no official record of their movements, their battles, or their fate. Every trace of the Ninth seems to disappear right after Eboracum. Their name drops from legionary rosters. It's missing from monument stones where legions were typically honored. Even at Hadrian's Wall, where military units were recorded in detail, the Ninth is simply gone. Not transferred, not merged, just erased, as if they never existed at all. This kind of silence from Rome was not normal. When legions were wiped out in battle, it was recorded. When they were transferred across the empire, it was noted. Rome tracked its military with obsessive detail. But in the Ninth's case, there was no death report, no commendation, no shameful defeat, just a blank spot where history should be. Historians have suggested different explanations over the years. One theory says they were ambushed and killed by the Picts during a failed northern campaign. Another claim they were quietly moved to Judea or Armenia and later destroyed in a forgotten battle. Some even think they were reassigned under a different number, but each theory falls apart under closer inspection. There's no archaeological evidence in Judea or Armenia to back it up. And Rome wouldn't erase a legion's name for logistical reasons. That wasn't their style. So here's the real problem. None of those options explains the full erasure. Legions that were destroyed are still remembered, even when they failed. They were listed with honor or shame, but they weren't deleted. The 9th is different. It looks like someone wanted them gone, not just physically, but from the record books too. This kind of erasure usually meant one thing in Rome: disgrace. But that raises more questions. The 9th had a spotless combat record. They were seen as heroes for decades. What could possibly turn an entire legion from legends to shadows? One theory gaining ground in recent years is ritual execution, or mass mutiny. This is where things start to shift from military mystery to political cover-up. There are scattered Roman texts that mention harsh punishments for legions that disobeyed or dishonored Rome. In extreme cases, entire units could be decimated, 1 in 10 soldiers killed, or wiped out entirely. And when Rome wanted people to forget, they controlled the records. The 2025 discovery supports this theory more than any before. The camp wasn't built like a normal fort. It was scattered, rushed, like soldiers knew they were being hunted or trying to make a final stand. Gear was found shattered, not just worn. Spears broken, shields splintered, and even evidence of Roman-on-Roman violence. That hints at something darker, not just a battle, but internal collapse. If the 9th turned on its officers, or if they were seen as a political threat, Rome might have erased them on purpose, not for losing a war, but for losing control. That kind of betrayal would shake confidence in the empire's strength. Better to delete them than explain what really happened. A new insight that researchers are now exploring is tied to one of Rome's secret rites: the damnatio memoriae, or condemnation of memory. It was used to blot out the names of disgraced emperors and criminals. Statues smashed, inscriptions chiseled out. Could this have been used on a legion? Until recently, the idea sounded too extreme. But the total erasure of the 9th, even from walls that list far less important units, suggests they may have suffered that exact punishment. If true, it means the 9th didn't just disappear. They were removed deliberately, like a stain on Rome's reputation. That would make them the only known legion in history to suffer damnatio memoriae. And it would explain why, for nearly 2,000 years, nobody could agree on what happened. Because the truth wasn't lost, it was buried. The cover-up. The Roman Empire had a strict tradition. Even when a legion failed, its memory was preserved. The infamous defeat at Teutoburg Forest was mourned, recorded, and marked by monuments. But with the 9th Legion, none of that happened. There were no reports, no commemorative stones, no signs of official mourning. It was as if the most feared Roman unit simply never existed. This silence isn't just strange, it's deliberate. The 9th was last seen in Britain, then vanished without any trace or explanation. Records didn't just stop, they were erased. This wasn't a clerical mistake or battlefield confusion. Someone made sure their name, actions, and fate were wiped out on purpose. New documents uncovered in 2025 changed everything. Deep within Vatican archives, researchers found a collection of sealed military reports marked NI, likely referring to Nerva Hadrianus, a transition point between Emperors Nerva and Hadrian. These reports mention an unauthorized movement of troops in northern Britannia. The 9th had apparently been sent further into Caledonia without Senate approval. That kind of operation could only have happened if someone high up wanted it off the books. Hadrian, the emperor at the time, was turning Rome inward. He stopped expansion and started building defensive walls. He was practical, cautious, and politically calculating. The 9th, on the other hand, had a reputation for aggression and loyalty to the old ways, glory through conquest. Their values didn't align with Hadrian's vision, and that made them dangerous. Some historians now believe the Ninth didn't vanish in battle. They were erased on purpose. They may have resisted Hadrian's shift in policy. Maybe they questioned his leadership or refused to withdraw. Either way, they became a liability. In Rome, a legion loyal to a past ideology was a threat to the future. If this theory is true, then the Ninth was marked for elimination. They were ordered deep into hostile land with no hope of support. There were no supply lines, no backup legions, no contingency plans. It was a self-ending mission disguised as an assignment. The empire didn't lose the Ninth. It fed them to the wolves. This would explain the silence. Honoring the Ninth would mean admitting what Rome had done. A public record would expose the betrayal. So their legacy was locked away, scrubbed from walls, and hidden in secret files. They weren't just left to die, they were erased from the story. And there's more. One passage in the Vatican documents refers to disciplinary reshaping by distance. That cryptic phrase likely means forced deployment meant to break unity. It's possible Hadrian wanted the Ninth fragmented, sent in waves rather than as a single force. That would weaken their command and morale, ensuring failure without direct confrontation. Archaeological digs in northern Scotland support this idea. Small, scattered Roman camps show signs of rushed construction and desperate defense. They weren't made to last. Bones found nearby show trauma from axes and crude weapons, not Roman steel. These weren't organized battles. They were ambushes. But what's most chilling is what wasn't found. Roman burial sites. That's unusual. Even in defeat, Rome buried its soldiers with honor. The lack of graves suggests Rome didn't plan to bring them back, or remember them. It's likely the Ninth was viewed as an internal threat, disguised as an external campaign. And by sending them north, the empire could wash its hands clean. No rebellion to report, no trial, just a lost legion blamed on barbarian savagery. Rome didn't lose control of the Ninth. They took control of their fate. What makes this worse is that it worked. For centuries, no one questioned their disappearance. Historians debated weak theories while the truth sat hidden in sealed archives. A Roman graveyard deep in Scotland just changed everything we thought we knew about the Ninth Legion's last days. The Highland Trap. The site where the Ninth Legion made its final stand is a silent graveyard. The camp's remains show a perfect trap. The surrounding landscape boxed them in. Hills on all sides, with thick forests sealing every exit. The layout of broken walls and burnt watch posts tells a story of soldiers who couldn't run. They were surrounded and picked off methodically. Excavated weapons scattered across the site didn't belong to Rome. Blades were made of rough iron, etched with spiral carvings and strange symbols. These were tribal weapons, linked to Celtic warriors and Druidic cults. Some of the spears had wood still attached, carved with images of skulls and bound spirits. The Ninth faced not just warriors, but people fighting a spiritual war. Forensic study of the skeletons brought a disturbing truth. These men didn't just die in battle. They were hunted and killed in ritual fashion. Skulls were caved in after death. Limbs were broken, not to fight, but to bind them, as ancient Druids believed. Several bodies were missing hearts, carefully removed, a Druidic rite to keep a soul from moving on. Near the heart of the site, researchers found a Druidic ring, stones arranged in a perfect circle. Inside it, nailed to a tree, was a Roman helmet. Its faceplate was cracked. On its surface were symbols translating roughly to, "This is what we do to ghosts who trespass." This wasn't just a threat. It was a declaration that the Romans were seen as cursed spirits, not men. To the Caledonian tribes, the Roman legion was more than an army. They were seen as invaders of the spirit realm, foreign energies that disrupted sacred lands. Roman temples, bathhouses, and roads were unnatural to these tribes. The Ninth brought not just war, but cultural destruction. Killing them was seen as restoring balance to a world out of order. More than 200 bodies were uncovered in a trench outside the main camp. They weren't buried with honor. They were dumped, some face down, some twisted, with arms bound. A few skulls had been painted red, a druidic ritual to mark the soul for rejection. The mass burial was not a mistake. It was staged, purposeful, and designed to send a message. Next to the bodies was a buried eagle standard, the symbol of Roman pride. It had been flipped upside down and surrounded by animal remains. Skulls of dogs, foxes, and wolves had been arranged around it in a circle. In Roman culture, an eagle standard was sacred. Losing it was shameful. To bury it in this way meant total spiritual defeat. One theory suggests the Druid priests led the ritual from the start. They likely advised the tribal leaders not to attack the Ninth in battle, but to trap them slowly. Let them panic. Let them feel their gods abandon them. Only then, strike with religious intent, not just to kill, but to erase. Another clue came from pollen samples around the graves. Certain plants were found: mistletoe, yew, and monkshood. These were used in druidic rites of death and cursing. It's believed the soil itself was spoiled in ritual, to block the spirits from returning. The Ninth wasn't just defeated, they were locked away forever. Nearby carvings in the stone cliffs showed figures in chains, with eagle heads crushed under feet. This wasn't art, it was a message. Rome's power would not reach these lands, and those who tried would be trapped here not just in death, but in spirit. The Ninth's memory was buried along with their bones. In 2025, a new discovery changed everything. Deep inside a Scottish cave near the battlefield, archaeologists uncovered Roman dog tags. Each one had a soldier's name, unit, and blood type, a rare find. Strangely, some tags were pierced and hung from deer antlers. This mimics a Celtic tradition where spirits were tied to animals. These tags were trophies, proof that the Caledonians didn't just fight Rome, they hunted it. Experts now believe the Ninth was baited intentionally. The Caledonians staged a withdrawal, leaving clear trails for the Romans to follow. Once deep in a hostile land, cut off and unsure, the ritual began. Screams would have echoed through the valley. But no Roman help came, no rescue. The Ninth had been abandoned on purpose. The men who chose treason? For years, historians blamed the Ninth's disappearance on a brutal Caledonian ambush. But new fragments from the Roman Senate archives tell a different story. Words like cultural contamination and behavioral divergence appear next to the Ninth's name. These weren't normal terms used for battlefield failure. They were codes, subtle language Rome used when soldiers began slipping out of line politically or morally. The Ninth had been stationed in Britain for decades, far longer than most legions remained in one post. Over time, they grew familiar with local customs, languages, and people. They weren't just fighting Britons, they were living beside them, marrying into their tribes, and trading in their markets. Loyalty to Rome started to fade. By the time Hadrian came into power, some within the Ninth no longer saw the Britons as enemies. This closeness may have sparked fear in the Roman leadership. Hadrian had just taken over the empire and was pushing a policy of retreat, not conquest. He didn't need a legion that sympathized with the people they were supposed to control. A whisper of rebellion, even without open action, was enough to set off alarms. Rome had seen this happen before, and it always acted swiftly. The eerie silence surrounding the Ninth may have been deliberate. If some soldiers had defected, spoken out, or formed relationships with Britons, it would have been seen as treason. There would be no parade, no statue, no story in the official records. Instead, the men would be erased, not as punishment, but as a warning. That silence might have been Rome's loudest message. Hadrian wasn't known for leniency. He prided himself on discipline and order. If he suspected the Ninth of being unreliable, he would have had them removed in a way that avoided public scandal. Maybe they were sent on a hopeless mission with no support. Maybe parts of the legion were broken up, reassigned, or even executed quietly under orders. Some researchers believe the Ninth's end mirrored other purges in Roman history. When a unit showed signs of rebellion or went soft, it was often dissolved without explanation. In one case in Gaul, a legion was quietly disbanded after its men refused to fight against locals they'd lived with. Rome didn't want martyrs. It wanted silence and obedience. There's also evidence that spies were planted inside the Ninth in its final years. Letters recovered from Vindolanda suggest strange orders, out-of-place officers, and conflicting commands. It's possible Hadrian seeded the legion with loyalists to monitor their actions. If a purge was coming, it would have been planned from within. One overlooked clue comes from a temple ruin near Hadrian's wall. An altar stone dedicated by a former soldier of the Ninth was found, with words scratched out violently. Some think it was an attempt to erase the man's identity after the purge. Others believe he survived, but was forced to abandon the legion's name forever. This silent mark may be the closest thing to a confession we have. The Ninth may not have been defeated in battle at all. Their disappearance might have been a political cover-up for something more complicated. A slow drift from loyalty, a growing sympathy with those Rome wanted them to control, and finally, a decision from the top to eliminate the problem quietly. This theory also explains why no commanding officer's name survives. Normally, Rome recorded everything, especially when a commander failed. But in this case, there's no general blame, no court-martial, no report. That suggests it wasn't a failure. It was policy. One new idea gaining traction is that Hadrian used the Ninth's fate as a test run. Not long after, he reorganized the military structure across the empire. Units were rotated more often. Local relationships were discouraged. The rules tightened. What happened to the Ninth may have shaped how Rome controlled its legions for the next century. History buried their story. But now, their shattered bones and broken banner have spoken louder than Rome ever could the history they tried to kill. In 2025, the world finally turned its attention to a mystery buried for 2,000 years. Major streaming services released documentaries, and university professors clashed live on air. Suddenly, the missing Ninth Legion wasn't just an academic topic, it became a global obsession. Viewers were shocked to learn that a full Roman legion may have been covered up, deleted from history with intent. And the more people looked, the clearer it became. Someone had something to hide. Scotland's reaction was powerful. For centuries, local tribes were labeled savages, outgunned, and outsmarted by Roman might. But new discoveries turned that view on its head. These so-called barbarians didn't just fight. They used strategy, terrain, and spiritual warfare to defeat an empire. Pride swelled across Scotland as the narrative flipped. From conquered to conquerors, historians had to change the way they thought about things. Physical proof broke down old ideas about how much better the Romans were. The attacks in the Highlands were not random. They were planned by the military and showed knowledge of the local culture. Scholars began to wonder about other disappearances in Roman history. How many other stories were changed or thrown out if Rome got rid of one legion? Something more important is going on here. This is more than just bones that got lost in the cold ground. It's also about countries and the lies they tell to keep up their image. The Ninth may have been hurt by something bigger. Rome trying to hold itself together as it falls apart. The perfect storm was made up of betrayal, fear of losing loyalty, and differences in culture. It wasn't just military erasure, it was also a political theater that looked like a loss. The Ninth Legion didn't just disappear, they were taken away. Bad guys in the forest and rulers in marble rooms worked together to defeat them. It was safer to hide the truth than to let their loyalty get out. Rome had dealt with other uprisings, but this one was too big. An army that felt like they belonged with the people they were sent to rule? That was the worst possible threat. It wasn't just shocking when Roman standards and mass graves were found broken and empty. The broken guns, the upside-down eagle, and the spiritual executions told a story that Rome did not want to be told. The battle wasn't lost. It was an alert sent. The tribes not only killed the army, but they also tried to erase their souls. What scares me more is how well it worked. No one talked about the Ninth for almost 2,000 years. No Roman author wrote about what happened. The records just stopped. They were supposed to be quiet, so it wasn't a mistake. The Ninth's end seems strangely familiar in the world we live in now. Stories are changed by governments to keep power, and loyalty is punished when it points in the wrong direction. The Ninth story sounds like a warning from the past. Disobedience is something that power hates, especially when it comes from within. But the truth always seems to make it through. History always leaves clues. They can be buried in the ground, written in bones, or whispered through symbols. These are being found faster than ever before by experts. Graves, camps, and carvings that were thought to be lost forever are being found with DNA tests, satellite images, and ground-penetrating radar. One theory gaining traction is the idea of spiritual erasure, that Rome didn't just want them dead, they wanted them forgotten. No songs, no monuments, no names carved in stone. Just a void where honor used to be. But the discovery of those remains in Scotland changed everything. In 2025, a new dig unearthed what is now believed to be the final camp of the Ninth. Bones arranged deliberately, Roman tools shattered and scattered, and a message carved in local symbols. Ghosts return in silence. This was more than war. It was a ritual to trap the Legion's memory underground. But it didn't stay there. The Ninth's name is being spoken again. Schools are teaching their story. Films and books are flooding the market. Even the Roman Catholic Church has been asked to acknowledge the cover-up, something it has never done before. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Click on the next video popping up on your screen for more amazing content.